Hey, what's up, guys? We have Ray Ciafardini Jr. here to talk about neuro-linguistic programming. So, how's it going today? How you doing, Ray?
Life is good today. How are you, Micah?
I'm good. Yeah, I was worried that I was going to mess up not only on your name but also on the actual NLP is easier to say. So
Yeah,
yeah, can you tell us first about yourself and then also neuro-linguistic programming, what it is and
absolutely.
what you do? Yeah,
Sure.
thanks.
I started my coaching practice, my coach Ray, in 2016, and what started me down this path of NLP was my first coach. He introduced me to neurolinguistic programming. And at that time, so this was a few years prior to me starting my practice, what I had seen in my life, personally and professionally, was people who wanted to create change, whether that was financial change in their life, excelling at their career, getting in better shape, all of those things. And what I saw people doing was making progress and then resorting back to old habits. So they make a little bit of progress and then step backward, and they just wouldn't make the desired and lasting change. So after my coach at the time had introduced me to neurolinguistic programming, I saw NLP as a set of tools that could help people create desired and lasting change. So in 2016, when I started my practice, I became a certified practitioner of neurolinguistic programming. In 2019, became a certified master practitioner of neurolinguistic programming, mental and emotional release, and hypnosis. And then in 2020, a certified trainer in all three of those modalities. So the impetus was really just seeing people that wanted to create change and not being able to create that desired and lasting change. And NLP really being a set of tools that would help me help people facilitate that change.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that's definitely true for me. Like I just recently I've like haven't had the motivation like I guess it was like before summer I had the motivation suddenly to go to the gym and I was as long as I do this every day for at least 30 minutes to an hour I'll be good. And then I just lost the motivation. Same thing with like even like stuff that I love to do like going to the beach or but I mean, I live like an hour and a half from the beach, so that's part of it. But it's like just
Mhm.
finding the motivation to do things, especially as I'm getting older and stuff. Um, I think that's like the main thing is that you kind of have to have the motivation to do it. Like you might say, "Oh, I want to do that," but like you really, it's a difference between wanting and actually having the motivation, I guess, to do it. And it's very hard, I think, to do things if you don't have the motivation, right? Like you're like, I want to go to the gym and I should go to the gym, right? I should eat better, but I just don't have the motivation. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like, where do you find the motivation? Um, but I really quickly before we go into that,
Mhm.
I want to see how long has I'm just gonna call it NLP from now on. How
Yep.
long has NLP been around? And yeah, how long has it been around?
So yes, and please forgive me. I didn't answer the second part of your question, what NLP is. So I can lump these together. So NLP was created, if you will. That's the right language, I believe here. That NLP was created by Richard Bandler and John Grinder back in the early 70s, and Richard Bandler, one of the co-creators, as I mentioned, his definition of NLP, or one of the definitions, I should say, is that it's an attitude and a methodology that leaves behind a trail of techniques. And when we look at the two parts of that definition, the second part being the techniques, and if anyone is familiar with NLP, they're probably familiar with the different techniques, and that's why people either love or they don't love NLP. It's based on the techniques. When the first part, I think, is much more interesting and much more applicable. So the attitude is that of curiosity and the methodology is that of modeling. So it's an attitude and a methodology that leaves behind a trail of techniques. So all they did was they just got curious about how people create their results. And then they started to model their beliefs, values, behaviors, and other things to produce their results. So what's fascinating about it is that if they created anything, like I realize we can say they co-created NLP, it was really this idea of modeling and how to model success in any area of life based on what they saw other people doing. So it was created back in the early 70s. And the idea is that we get curious about creating the results that other people have gotten. And then we model that behavior, values, beliefs, things of that nature. And interestingly, we can do the same thing for motivation. We have a formula for that as well.
Okay, and I talked with you a little bit before about how it says on, I think it says on Wikipedia that it's like
Mhm.
pseudoscientific. So if somebody, was a little hesitant about it because it's not technically scientific,
Mhm.
how would you go about kind of like, I guess, changing their mind in terms of that?
That's a great question. And chances are, full transparency, I probably wouldn't try and change their mind. And I'm always open to the conversation, right? I think as a coach, one of the one of the most challenging things to do is coach someone who doesn't believe in what you're doing or coaching someone that doesn't want to be coached. So I probably wouldn't change their mind in the conversation that I'd have. And it's that it wasn't what they were looking for at the time from everything I've read from some of the original writings. And the interesting thing is you can go and you can be trained currently by Richard Bandler and John Grinder. They both have NLP companies that you can go and learn from them, and they have YouTube videos and hear them speak and whatnot. It's the idea that they were looking for what was useful, right? That they were looking for what was useful. That if you were to walk up to someone at the gym who has a six pack and you ask them, "Hey, how do I get a six pack like you?" and they were to tell you what they eat and what their workout routine and that type of stuff, well, that in and of itself isn't scientific because you aren't running tests, you don't have a hypothesis there. What you're looking to do is just duplicate what that person has done based on what they've done. So the idea that NLP is pseudoscience, well, yes, maybe, right? And I think that part of that is also driven by the claims that some practitioners will make about what NLP does. Because NLP is about building rapport, both externally with other people and with yourself, and being able to communicate in a way that creates change internally and externally. It's about being aware of what's going on internally and externally. And while some of those things may not be scientific, they are experiences that I think that most people have. And the idea of just modeling someone else's behavior, they're right. Like that's not necessarily a scientific way of going about it. And we know that we can get results that way. So there are some things that are backed up by science that NLP does talk about. And going back to what they originally said, they were looking for what was useful, and they found a lot of useful things that help people create their desired and lasting results.
Yeah, I agree. It's the type of thing where like if it works, it works, and I can't really I have a hard time disagreeing with you. Like if it works or with somebody, if it's working, then it's working, and whether it's scientific or not doesn't really matter. Like I told you before too, I had like two guys on to talk about astral projection, and I told them straight up, I was like, I'm a skeptic, changed my mind or whatever, and basically they're just like, well, I mean, the main thing that changed my mind, I guess, was like the fact, not like I'm not saying that it changed my mind
Mhm.
on astral projection, but it's like they say they do it. I don't know how often they do it, but it's like kind of like, well, I guess I'll take your word for it. Like if you feel like you're really, I mean, that's obviously kind of like a bad comparison because that's just like completely unscientific and pretty out there. But I mean, in terms, it's hard for me to like for them to say, I'm doing it and I can teach you how to do it, and just be like, well, no, you're lying. Um, that's kind of a weird comparison because I know yours is way more legit than astral projection, but so I mean, same thing with like I'm bringing up some like kind of like bad comparisons, but it's like
Mhm.
some people will even say like Scientology works for me, or like just religion in general. Obviously, Scientology has a lot of flaws, but like if somebody like joins Scientology and they're like, you know what, like it works for me and it makes sense for me and it makes me be a better person, it's kind of hard to disagree with that, right? I mean, as long as they're not sending you off on a ship or whatever, like putting you there's like this I forgot what they call it, like gold something near me. It's a Scientology thing where like supposedly they do some crazy stuff, but as long as they're not doing anything like sketchy, if it's working, it's working, right? I mean, would you kind of agree with that, or
So while I don't know a lot about Scientology or astral
yeah,
projections, what I can say is that when I'm working with clients, I never want someone to believe something across the board on insufficient evidence, right? So if, for example, and I can give I'll give a personal example, right? Now, this was before I know what I know now and before I was studying NLP. There was a time where I'm like, you know what? I need to get in better shape. So what did I do? I'm like, I need to go to the gym. Right. So I'm like, cool. So I started going to the gym, wake up in the morning, go to the gym. That lasted for, I think, roughly a little less than a week. And then that habit just fell off. So I'm like, you know what? I need to start eating better, because if I start eating better, then I'll have more energy to go to the gym. And then what ended up happening was I started eating better for about a week. And then by the end of the week, again, I was driving through the drive-through at night because I was too tired to go home and cook dinner. So I'm like, maybe I have too much sugar in my diet. Maybe I need to cut out all the sweet tea that I'm drinking. Well, I did that, and then this same thing happened. A few days later, I'm just washing down my fast food at night with the sweet tea, and I'm still not going to the gym in the morning. So what I realized through this process was that, you know what? I'm just too tired at the end of the day. So if I focus on sleep, it's going to make going to the gym in the morning easier. I'm going to have more willpower to eat well and drink water rather than sweet tea. So nothing about what I did, it was just trial and error on my own part, right? So if someone were to ask me, hey, in your experience, what was it that helped you do the things you wanted to do? Well, it was just getting sleep at getting the right amount of sleep, going to bed earlier, waking up at the same time in the morning. And again, I go back to this idea that yes, that worked for me and we can duplicate other people's successes. And there is something to that, although I didn't have the research at the time to support that those sleep habits were the right way to go. So, I don't want someone to believe something on insufficient evidence. And as we talk about NLP, I hope no one gets that impression of me. It's the idea that we're going to try things, we're going to experiment and make sure that we're moving closer to that desired outcome. And that's where that idea of behavioral flexibility comes in. I'm up for trying anything and testing things out, and let's see what moves us closer to the goal. And that is with respect to also a placebo effect, right? I mean, placebo effects are real, and I want to make sure that my clients aren't just getting that. I want my clients to make real progress, and there are ways of tracking that.
Yeah, and like I wasn't trying for
Yeah.
whatever reason. Like those two things just popped up into my mind as like I've heard people like talk about those Scientology or whatever, and being like, you know what, it works for me. It doesn't work for everybody, but it works for me, or whatever the religion is. I don't know. I
Mhm.
to I just happened to pick two ones that were kind of like pretty fringe. But the point being is that like if someone if something is working for someone and they're saying it's working, then I don't know. I guess I kind of take their word for it. I'm a pretty trusting person. But so in terms of how you help people or like what kind of conditions you help people with,
Mhm.
is it everything from anxiety to depression to any type of like psychological disorder that you work with, or is it more kind of like motivational? I want to, I want to go to the gym, or I want to eat better, or I want to do better at my job type thing, you know?
That's a yeah, that's a fantastic question. Thank you for asking that. That, I'm a coach, right? I'm certified by the Association for Integrative Psychology as a trainer of neuro-linguistic programming, mental and emotional release, and hypnosis. I'm not a licensed healthcare professional, right? So I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a social worker. I'm not licensed in anything. So by virtue of that, and the the coaching field is very unregulated, right? Anyone can call themselves a coach. So by virtue of that, I do draw my own lines, meaning that I know what I'm capable of doing, and there are certain places where I won't step on a doctor's toes. That would be unethical of me to do so. So I err on the side of caution on who I'm willing to take on as a client. So generally speaking, the people who I work with, they aren't a harm to themselves. They aren't or they aren't, yeah, they aren't a danger to themselves. Please forgive me, wrong word there. They aren't a danger to themselves. They aren't a danger to other people. Like if someone needs a doctor, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a therapist, a counselor, something like that, I won't work with them. There's a saying that when in doubt, refer them out. And I'm in doubt way more often than I am in just, yeah, I'll work with anyone. So having set it up like that, the people who I work with, like my last few clients, they were people who were stuck in their career, for example. They didn't have they they were at a job where they were doing well and it just didn't feel good, and they didn't have the confidence, the motivation, or whatever that was that they needed to say, you know what, I'm going to go do my own thing, or hey, it's time for a change. So generally speaking, there are people that life looks good on paper, it doesn't feel great, and there's just something holding them back that I can help them release and go on to do the cool things they want to do.
Okay, so it's mainly so yeah. What are the things that you mainly are dealing with, like work, like we said, gym, maybe eating, just kind of like productivity type things, just feeling better in general, happiness type things.
Yeah, great question. So the eight, so I have what I call these eight houses, and we may get into a conversation why I call them houses later on. And for now, I just call them eight houses. That there are eight areas of life. Again, these houses that if someone's kind of stuck in them, these are the things I do. So the eight houses: spiritual, mental, emotional, physical, environmental, social, occupational, financial. Now, in any of those areas, they may need a licensed professional. And if someone, for example, just they have some hangups around money, some beliefs or values around money that they aren't saving the money they want, or they aren't, or they don't have the job that's going to allow them to produce the income they want, something like that. Well, in any of those areas, there may be limiting beliefs that we need to release and then set up a plan. And we model the success of other people that allow them to move forward in that area of life. So those are the eight areas. And in any one of those eight areas, I may not be the right person for them. And if I am, we have a process that we go through which allows them to move forward in any of those areas that they choose.
Okay, and like if I came to you and I said I have like anxiety, OCD, it's not like super serious, but it's holding me back in terms of,
Mhm.
just regular type stuff. For one, would you like work with me?
So again, a great question. And it depends on what we're working on, right? So if you were to say, hey, OCD, like that's not in my wheelhouse, right? If you're telling me though that, hey, you know, I, I want to get in better shape, or I want to, form better relationships, something like that. Well, then we would go through the same process. And if it's okay, I'm happy to share that process, and this may answer the question.
Yeah, yeah, I was gonna ask you what the process would be. Yeah.
Yeah. So I use a model called the four requisites for change: release work, create a compelling future, take action, maintain focus. So, if, for example, you were to come and say, hey, I want to get in better shape, right? Like you mentioned, going to the gym. Well, first, we would start with release work. And we start with this because what I often hear people talk about whenever setting goals, or even just in personal development in general, it's set a big goal, take massive action, and then we'll see what happens, right? Or fight the naysayers or whatever limiting beliefs come up. We start with the release work to get rid of the emotional baggage, the limiting beliefs, the internal conflicts, right? Part of me wants to go to the gym, part of me wants to stay on the couch, those types of things. So we release those things. So then we can set a goal that's unencumbered by the past. And that's significant. There's a saying that I used to love, and then my perspective on this has shifted. It's a saying that everything I want is on the other side of fear. And the reason I no longer hold on to that is because what I realized was that everything I want isn't on the other side of fear. It's that fear is clouding potentially what I want. So it's about releasing the excess of those of that emotional baggage, anger, sadness, fear, hurt, guilt, emotions like that. So then we can truly see what we desire without seeing it through those lenses. Then once we create that compelling future, that goal, then we take action on it based on a model of success. And then we maintain focus on what we want rather than what we don't want. So it's release work, create a compelling future, take action, maintain focus. And through that process, there's potential where the anxiety, it may drop, right? We have some techniques to work with anxiety, sure. And that's the process, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically, environmentally, socially, occupationally, or financially, that if someone's looking to create change, release the stuff holding them back, the emotional baggage, the limiting beliefs, the internal conflicts, set a goal in that area of life, take action on it, and maintain focus. And that's what I guide my clients through.
Okay, so what would be like an example of where to start or do actually putting that into action?
Great question. So the way that I have my program broken up, so if I'm working with someone privately, so everyone starts in a breakthrough session. The breakthrough session takes care of those first two requisites: release work and creating a compelling future. So in the breakthrough session, that's where we figure out what those strategies are that are potentially holding someone back, identifying the limiting beliefs and things of that nature. And then one of the techniques we use is something called mental and emotional release. And it's a powerful technique that helps to release those types of things. So not cope or navigate, helps to release those things. And then once we release those, we craft that compelling future. So that's the breakthrough session. That's what takes care of the first two requisites. And then I've had some clients where that's all they need. They go through a breakthrough session and then they have, they know the right actions to take. Maybe the breakthrough session just we just released whatever was holding them back from taking action, and then they can maintain focus and they're good on their own. Other clients, they may need coaching to help with the action steps and the maintaining focus. So everyone starts in a breakthrough session, and that's where, again, we figure out what those strategies are that they're running that are preventing them from moving forward. We use the techniques to release those, and then we craft the goal or craft the compelling future.
Okay. I mean, could we give an example of, I mean, not necessarily of one of your clients, but
Yeah.
of a breakthrough session? What would happen in one of the sessions, either hypothetical
Yeah.
or if you wanted to, you could do it on me or whatever. I wouldn't necessarily be totally factual, but maybe we could just like play through it. I mean, we don't have to play through a whole
Yeah.
thing, but like just like an example of what would be a breakthrough session.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm happy to share an example, and I'll change the names and some of the details to protect the innocent or not so innocent, right? So the yes, so I had a client who was I'll use career is a great example here, where I had a client who was at a job that they were doing well in, and they wanted to get out of it. Now I'm sharing this example because it's fascinating what happens on the other side of the release work. So we the first part of the breakthrough session is what we call a detailed personal history, where I'm asking questions and they're sharing stories with me. And as they share these stories, what we're looking for are the patterns that emerge. William James said that if you want to know what I'm paraphrasing, if you want to know what people believe, you watch what they do. So through these stories, we can start to see patterns and the strategies that they're running to create their results. Because I really don't care what they're saying, like the words they're using. I'm looking for the patterns in their stories, right? So by virtue of that, we identified some beliefs and some strategies that they were running in their life. And then when we got to the release work, we we do some work with values and beliefs and things of that nature, because values and beliefs are two big drivers of behavior. If I believe it's going to rain, I'm going to grab an umbrella as I go out the door, right? If I value being dry rather than wet, I'll grab the umbrella. So beliefs and values drive a lot of behavior. So once we released, or once we worked on those strategies, figured out values and things of that nature, cleaned them up with some release work. Well, on the other side of that breakthrough session, where they were hoping that they'd be able to just step away from the job, well, what came to them was, no, I need to stay here, finish the job, and leave on my terms, not the company's. So that changed what their compelling future was. They stuck it out, they did a good job, and they ended things the right way on their terms. And then they were able to move on to another job. So they went in hoping for one thing. And once we got rid of all the, I'll say, cloudiness, right? The emotional baggage, the limiting beliefs, and the internal conflicts, they were able to make a decision that they were comfortable with to move forward. And while, I'm going to use a personal example here, because at this point, it's not uncommon for people to be like, well, the result's still the same. They're still in the job. Here's the difference: that I used to have a fear of heights. We have a phobia model that we can work through some phobias to lessen those. And just so we're clear, it's good to have a fear of heights, right? Like we don't, it's good to have a fear. The idea is that it's not a phobia where it's irrational. Like I used to white knuckle first floor balconies because I was 10, 15 feet up, right? And I was white knuckling these. Most people would consider that irrational. I had a fear of heights or a phobia of heights. So once I got rid of the fear, I'm good for, I don't know, 30 stories. Like I'm pretty good high up now. And I used to think that I didn't want to go skydiving because I was afraid of heights. Well, once I released the phobia, I still don't want to go skydiving. The difference is now I'm making the decision, not the fear. And again, someone may say, well, it's still the same end result. You aren't going skydiving. They're right. And again, the difference is I'm making the decision. I don't want to go skydiving, just like the billions of other things that I have no desire to do. It's just me making the decision now, not the baggage, not the fear.
Yeah, yeah. Sounds good. And is some so first of all, I get like so do you personally, like you mentioned, looking at someone else who is successful or whatever and like kind of like doing what they do? Like are you looking at specific people? How are you going about getting the data, I guess, on somebody who you're like kind of like you know, altering your life after or whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it, sometimes we model their behavior in another area of life, and sometimes we do have to go outside of them and find someone. So, using those two as options for some people, let's say someone is struggling at work and they're really good at the gym. Well, we can start to look at things like, well, when you go to the gym, what do you do at the gym that drives your results? Well, I have a workout partner. They help hold me accountable. Cool. What else do you do? I track my results, right? I track how much weight, my increase, I look at my progress, those types of things. So let's just use those two. Well, if that strategy is working at the gym, well, let's get curious about this. Could that potentially work at work, right? Is there potential for having someone like a gym partner at work where you two can bounce ideas off each other and help hold each other accountable? I'm not a huge fan of accountability in this example, and we're going to run with it for the sake of the example. And then, well, are you tracking your results at work? Like how many calls you're making or whatever the job calls for? Well, no, I'm not. Cool. So what would it look like if we tracked it so you could look at your progress, right? Because if accountability and tracking progress is what motivates you to do a good job, let's see if that works, right? And that's an example where someone's doing well in one area, they aren't doing well in another, and they can just model their own behavior. Now, in other cases, it may be as simple as, hey, you want to learn how to, online marketing, right? You want to be a better online marketer. Cool. Let's do some research. Who's the best one out there? Do they have a book or like a program that you can join? So there are a lot of different ways to figure out what's driving other people's success. Sometimes they don't have to go outside of themselves if they already have a model of success. And in other cases, it may be a book, it may be talking to someone they know, it may be a mentor. I've worked with a lot of people where they have amazing people in their lives. They just weren't able to take those steps until we did the release work. And now that all that stuff that's holding them back is gone, they can just talk to a friend who's getting amazing results, something like that.
Yeah, I feel like so much of stress and just unhappiness for a lot of people comes from like work and just money and financial stability and that just it seems like that's just a hard one because if you have a job where it's like a 9 to 5 and you're like just sitting at a computer all day and like you hate your job, it's very hard to kind of like get out of that type of situation. So I guess what would be good good things for people to do if they just are in that type of situation where they're just like you kind of like mentioned the other guy who chose to kind of like it sounds like a lot of it has to do with like being in control of the situation rather than having someone else or something else be in control of you. But what would be some good examples of people who just feel like they're in the wrong career and aren't making enough money, or like you said, making enough money but just not happy with it?
Sure. Yeah. That's I as people are listening to me explain this, I want to make sure like I understand there are situations that people are in, right? Like I gave one example there, and there are people who they they stay in a job because they have a family to support, right? Like they may suffer through that because they're willing to, you know, the ends justify the means, right? So I as I go through this, it is coming from a place of deep respect for people have life situations that I I'm not going to say completely out of their control. And I recognize some people are in some tough spots and they have to make decisions based on the tough spots they're in. So while this may be a gross generalization, I hope that everyone gives me some leniency in how I'm about to explain this. That one thing that we look at is something called life values, where, for example, I mentioned those 8 areas of life: spiritual, mental, emotional, physical, occupational, financial, environmental, social. Well, we all operate in a hierarchy that for some people, where there's an order. I just present them in that order because that's the order that I have them remember or memorized in. And when we look at how people live their lives, we can see that some people value those things more than others in how they're living their lives. And it doesn't mean that they all aren't important or there's not some form of it that is important in their lives. Like, for example, for me, my mental part of my life, me learning and growing, that's extremely important to me, right? And practically how I live my life, it if you were to look at my calendar and how I live my life, you would say, well, wow, that's more important than your physical well being. And that's true. And it doesn't mean that I don't work out, right? I still exercise because I understand the importance of physical health. My reason for saying this is that it's important to identify what is important to us and the time that we give to it. So I'm going to use this example of occupation and finances, kind of the example you just gave, that there are people who are willing to work a job they hate because they want the money. And then there are other people that are willing to walk away from a great paying job because they think that what they do is more important than the money. Now, that's um, subjectively, that's entirely up to them, right? They may be living out their values. And there are great examples throughout history of people that hardly make any money and they change the world. And then there are other people that they may not like their job and they have a ton of money and that allows them to do some cool things that they wouldn't be able to do otherwise. So it once we start to look at values and what drives people and we can create a life that's in alignment with what's most important to us, that's what can create that sense of joy and fulfillment. And I'm not ignorant to the fact that some people are just in bad spots, right? And I want to be respectful of that. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, for sure. I think that different things just matter differently than to some people than to others. And like for me, it's kind of like I think that I just have like a hard time. Um, I just kind of sadly, I don't think that like money is that motivating to me. So it's I'd rather
Mhm.
do something that like I enjoy doing than making money. But then there's definitely other people out there who, like you said, would way rather make a ton of money and just be like stressed out all the time and unhappy. And there's probably people who aren't stressed out all the time and are happy just doing their job and they make a lot of money. So
Mhm.
it's kind of like different strokes for different folks type thing. Um, yeah. So is when I first like looked into it a little bit, is some of I've heard like the whole thing of like PMA, positive mental attitude, and like if you think good thoughts and you have kind of like positive thoughts and like positive, energy or whatever, then you'll like naturally do positive things. Like does NLP kind of would you say you agree with that type of I mean it's kind of like an obvious thing, but is that kind of like part of the course is just kind of like focusing on positive things? Is that or not really?
That's it's a fascinating question. So I'm going to stay in my lane here in the world of personal development. And it's my belief that there are a lot of things being perpetuated in the field of personal development that make people feel better that don't necessarily make them better. And what I mean by that is both you and I'm going to guess here that you like puppies. Maybe you don't and just play along if you don't. That we could sit here right now and both think about puppies, right? And that may put a smile on our face if we happen to like puppies. Well, that doesn't make life better other than me just thinking about something positive and then putting a smile on my face. And maybe the next thing I do a little bit better because I'm thinking about puppies and I'm not, stressed or full of anxiety. So, for me, yes, a positive mental attitude is important. And much like we started this conversation with, 30 something minutes ago, that I want it to be based on something. That there are people whose lives look great on paper and they feel terrible. There are people whose lives don't look great on paper. And like, I mean, it's going to be subjective and we're just like, they're living terrible lives and they're still happy, right? It's this outside judgment we're placing on it. I just, feeling good if things aren't good. It reminds me of that picture of that meme where it's that guy getting swallowed by a shark and he's got his thumb out of the shark's mouth saying everything's okay. Well, is it? Right. So I think a positive mental attitude is important. Yes. And there's a difference between that and, in my view, being Pollyanna-ish. There's a difference between everything is great and I'm going to be okay. So I think that finding that balance of just putting on a smile when things aren't great can it help? Sure. And I think in some cases, people are just perpetuating some of what's going on because they aren't confronting what's in front of them. So that, yeah, positive mental attitude is important. Once we get rid of the baggage and people, like, I'm less concerned with how my clients feel in the moment than getting rid of the stuff holding them back, because once they're able to do the things they desire to do and live the life that's congruent and in alignment with most important to them, I know they're going to feel good. I just don't necessarily need them thinking of puppies right now, because they're going to create a life that feels good and is good according to their values and beliefs.
Yeah. But like regarding the situation where somebody's life isn't great, but they do feel good. Like you said before, it's kind of like different for each person. So it's kind
Yeah.
of like hard. It's kind of hard to judge, like, is this person just kind of like full of it and they're really just not happy, or like could they just potentially be really happy and just be in a really bad place? You know what I mean?
Well, so in those particular cases, like essentially what we end up running through are their values. Because if someone's living a life in alignment with what's most important to them, right? If someone's in a relationship, and let's just say they have no money, and their relationship is honoring their values of, let's say, communication, love, integrity, companionship, and they're checking the boxes on their values and they're happy, cool, right? If someone's in a job and they're making enough money to get by, and money's not important to them, and they feel fulfilled and happy at the end of the day, and they aren't just lying to themselves, I'm on board, right? And that, I think, is that subjective nature of what you're referring to. If they're putting on a smile and their life is completely out of alignment to what's most important to them, that's where, and it's not my job to make the call. I would push back though and make sure that they aren't lying to themselves. That I would want to make sure that they are living a life. And again, it's all going to be subjective on their part. If someone's not going to, they probably wouldn't be my client if they're potentially living the life, because why would someone work with me if things are great? And some of those, like, they just wouldn't even start the conversation, right? So I guess that's kind of the caveat to all of this, that if I'm engaged with a client in this case, there's something that they're working on, whether it's they're somewhere that's great and they want it to be better, or things aren't great and they want it to be better. Either case, though, they have to know that they want to go somewhere else other than where they are. So I guess that's probably where that conversation needed to start, that they wouldn't be working with me if they didn't want to create some sort of change.
Yeah. I think it's so hard to find for a lot of people what makes them happy, because it's like you have to juggle, especially like in your job, you have to juggle making money, but then also doing what you want to do. And me personally, I kind of feel like if I'm doing something that I don't want to do, but I'm making money, I'm still not happy. So I think it's hard for people to figure out. And I think that as a society, we're kind of, I personally think as a society, we're like kind of going towards people potentially being happier like with AI and stuff. That's just my personal opinion. I know that like some people like would disagree with that, but it's like personally, in my life, I feel like there's more opportunities for me to like kind of like work on my own conditions, like with like I do like Amazon Flex, like delivery driver. And so it's like
Mm-hmm.
if I'm working for someone, like I just can't, it's like not even like an issue really with like management or superiority or whatever. It's just for some reason I hate being in a situation where it's like a 9 to 5 and like you have a manager looking over your shoulder. But when I do Amazon Flex, which I don't know if you know what that is, but basically it's just kind of like an Uber Eats for Amazon, where like you go pick up the orders and deliver them. I'm perfectly happy. You know what I mean? Like it's like I go pick up the packages, I do the job, they pay me a certain amount. There are some setbacks to it, like they don't give like health. I mean, you could get health insurance, but they don't give health insurance. They don't give like all the benefits that normal jobs do. And it's, to be honest with you, it's not like the best job in terms of like I think like when people look at it as, oh, like you're a delivery driver or like a gig job worker, but it's like I'm happy doing it. I work when I want. I'm able to do this right now because I can go pick up a shift later. Um, so my point is kind of like I think that things are going more in that direction. A lot more people are able to like work from home. A lot more people are able to kind of like use AI in everyday jobs. But then some people do look at it as AI is just going to take their job, and that's probably could potentially be a bad thing too. Um, yeah. So what do you think about that? I guess in terms of like the future, like, do you feel like things are getting better for people, and or maybe, or some people look at it as it's getting worse. So what do you think?
Yeah, well, a few thoughts on that. And again, we've only known each other in a brief conversation prior to hitting record on this. So, it sounds to me like autonomy is a value of yours in your career, right? Because you value the ability to make your schedule and not, as you said, have someone looking over your shoulder. So that to me sounds like an example, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that you're living out one of your values, and this was a way that you saw to do that. Now, with that said, yeah, I think that AI is, I think, a fascinating conversation because when we look at what AI is currently doing and what it's going to be capable of doing, and I say capable of doing because there's no reason to believe, in my view, that it's going to slow down, that it's only going to get better, it's only going to be able to do more and more. And the yeah, I think that it's going to take some jobs, just as other technologies in the past have done. And I think that this is drastically different than other technologies than in the past, because if we get to a certain point with AI, and I think this is a rabbit hole we could probably spend hours talking about, that it's, narrow, or we have narrow AI right now that can do specific tasks. Once it becomes more generalized, it is. I mean, it's going to be a question as to how do people find, value, or how do people find meaning, even in some cases, when they aren't deriving that from what they do. Because there may come a time, and I know that there are a lot of people talking about this, people like Nick Bostrom, for example, that idea of what a solved world looks like. And I think that's a fascinating conversation. It's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next, I mean, it could, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
Yeah, I've recently actually listened to him on two different podcasts, and I guess he wrote the book. Like I'm forgetting the name of it, or AI Utopia, I think.
Hmm.
And in my opinion, the world that that creates looks. I'm looking forward to it, but like I said, I know a lot of people aren't, and not only AI, but like what I'm doing, just because of technology. 50 years ago, especially 50 years ago, 100 years ago, I wouldn't be able to do this job. I would like literally have to. Everybody had to go to work. 100 years ago, people like literally had to be coal miners, but now because of all the technology we have, people. I know there's still people who have to do not great jobs or whatever, but I feel like it's getting better and better. Um, in terms of, I wanted to say like so. In terms of like discipline, like one, I remember like a teacher telling me in high school a long time ago, and it's kind of like an obvious thing, but like it kind of hit me. It was kind of like discipline is doing what you want, doing what you need to do, even though you don't want to do it. So even though I'm like, like I keep going back to the gym, even though I kind of question if that's like the optimal thing, but that's like one question I have for you too. But um for going to the gym or anything that I need to do. If I even though I don't want to do it after work, I'm like I need to go to the gym. I don't really want to do it. And most of the time recently I've just been like fuck it, and I go home. But I kind of feel like if I just stuck to what I needed to do, and I think that that can even be hard to find is what exactly you need or should be doing, quote unquote. But in terms of just doing what you should be doing, even though you don't want to, do you feel like that could kind of like fix some things in people's lives? Or do you feel like that's kind of just like not really fixing the issue and you're just kind of forcing yourself to do things? Does that make sense?
It does. Or I believe it does. So, a couple things on that topic. Like, do I think that working out, eating well, drinking plenty of water, and that sort of stuff? I mean, yes, I think that most people, they benefit from those things, right? Getting enough sleep, all of those types of things. So that that's more just solid health and nutrition, right? Now, if we're talking about like not wanting to do something and doing it anyways, this is where I'm going to kind of step outside of my coaching and just go to some personal views. This is where, if you ask me, like, uh, well, I would describe myself as a determinist, right? Not that we have this libertarian sense of free will that most people believe we have, that it's this idea that you may intend to do things, you just don't necessarily intend to do those things. That's some language I picked up from Robert Sapolsky. So the idea of they not wanting to do it and doing it anyways, consciously, we may say, I didn't feel like doing it and I did it anyways. Well, you wouldn't have been able to do it anyways if you didn't want to do it at some level. So I'm not a big fan of, just generally speaking, even when I'm working with clients, to go back to my coaching practice, consciously, I don't really put much into that because I believe that what we're doing is being driven by our unconscious, because that's where beliefs and values and things like that are stored. I mean, because how many times does someone say, well, I didn't want to go for a run and I went anyways? Well, at some level, you wanted to go for a run. It's just whatever you're saying to yourself, it may not have been wanting to go for a run. So that's why a lot of NLP, MER, and hypnosis is working with the unconscious programming, not just what we're saying to ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's, and I don't really want to like only focus on, well, yeah, I don't really want to necessarily only focus on like the gym because I kind of feel like that's something, or eating or sleeping, or because that's kind of like stuff that like everybody quote unquote like should be doing. But
Well, it's the same process. Like you could plug in anything for the gym and it's still going to be some sort of motivation. And I have a formula for that I'm happy to share. It doesn't matter if it's going to the gym, eating well, quitting a job, starting a company. It's the same. Like the way that I view it, the processes are still very similar. So I get that it's not just about the gym, and those are things that someone should quote unquote they should be doing. I'm still on board with the example because you could plug in anything for that, and we still do things for reasons.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But in terms of saying like you unconsciously want to go for a run, and so then you do it. I think there's a lot of situations where it's like I should be running and I'm not. But it's I kind of feel like there's certain people I know in their lives, like my sister, for instance, who she's a very like devout Christian, and it seems like from as long as I've known her, she's been very just disciplined in general with doing what she quote unquote should be doing. It's kind of like she has a good job, like I think she, she's lost weight, like blah blah blah, everything she does. I think she's a very disciplined person. And I think that if you kind of are a very disciplined person, you're naturally kind of going to get to the place that you want ultimately to get to, obviously. But it's like if you don't want to go to the gym but you go to the gym, if you don't want to go to work but you go to work, and you do a good job at all these things and whatever else that you should be doing, it's going to kind of like naturally lead to this positive lifestyle. um the problem that I have is like if I don't have the motivation, I just won't do it. So like you said, it's like if I want to go to the gym, then you if I want to go to the gym, then ideally you just want to go to the gym and you will. But I think there's a lot of situations where it's like I just won't. But I kind of feel like if I did all the things that I should be doing, ultimately it would lead to a happier lifestyle or a happy lifestyle. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yes, I'm on board with that. And I do have a comment on motivation. So to start off with what I'm on board with, yes. I mean, if people, for example, if people are learning and growing mentally, if they're spending time with loved ones, if they're eating well, working out, mentally, emotionally, physically, and, spiritually, religion or no religion, if they feel like they're serving a higher purpose of some sort, something outside of themselves, again, religion or no religion doesn't matter. People who aren't religious can have spiritual experiences too. That those things, yes, like there's solid research to say that those types of things lead to a what people would maybe call a happy life or more positive emotion, right? Like goal fulfillment does create positive emotion, right? In a lot of people. So with that being said, yes, like there are certain things that we know that lead to a different type of feeling in life. Now, when it comes to motivation, and this is the part that I believe is happening below the surface, which is why even if consciously we may be saying, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this, and I do it anyways, the formula that I use with clients, and this is generalizing because there are probably some other ways to get there, Motivation is a combination of an alignment of our values with a compelling future. So when we look at, for example, times we aren't motivated, well, is there a compelling reason to do it moving forward that we're excited about or that we find valuable? Well, if there is, and it's in alignment with with what's most important to us, well, for me, I mean, I'm happy to share that the reason why I do the exercise that I do, well, one of my primary values in my physical area of life is energy. I want to have energy to be able to show up, right, for something like this. I want to be able to show up and, do my job well as a coach or other activities. And I mean, I want to have energy. That's one of the values that are driving my behavior. Now, my compelling future in my physical house right now, I happen to be training for something that my girlfriend and I are doing. So I have a reason to be doing the exercise, and my values support that. So even on the days where I don't feel like doing it, I'm still doing it because I'm driven by those things, regardless of what's going on inside of my head. Like there may be times where I'm, exercising or doing what I need to do to train, where the whole time I'm like, and this is where that positive mental attitude, I don't put too much into it. Could the workout be going better if I felt good about it? Sure, absolutely. It'd be more pleasant for my girlfriend if I had a smile on my face. And if I'm just getting through it because I know I need to train because it's in alignment with my values and I have a compelling reason to do it, it gets done.
Yeah. And if you're doing all the things, and that once again, I think that it's hard to figure out what exactly to be doing. But if you're doing all those things and you're disciplined and you're like, okay, I want to do A, B, and C today, and it's like you really don't want to do them. It's like working out, eating well,
Right.
whatever else. You don't really want to go to work. You don't really want to go to the gym, but you do them. Do you feel like that's ultimately going to lead to um overall happiness, or do you think that there's something still kind of missing there where it's like, oh, well, I've gone to work, I did a good job, I went to the gym, I did a good job, and I ate healthy, but there's still something that's kind of missing. It's not only about the discipline and
Got it.
doing, you know what I mean?
Okay, so two things. D- that the You mentioned like it's hard to figure those things out, like what one should be doing, right?
Well, that's part of all of this. You know what I mean?
Okay.
It's like there are things that we quote unquote should be doing that society tells us to do, but then there's probably things that you may not even really be thinking about that you should be doing or aren't doing, right? And like maybe you are doing a good job at your job, but just like overall, like we kind of talked about before, your job just makes you unhappy. So like there's no fix to that besides just quitting your job, and that creates a whole nother set of issues. But it's like, because then when you quit your job, you don't have the money to feed your family. You know what I mean? I feel like the way I'm asking the question might be kind of complicated, but because it's kind of like a multiple part question. But if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, will you feel happy? But then there's also the second part, which is kind of like, how do you know what you're doing is the correct thing that you should be doing? You know what I mean? It's kind of complicated, but
Got it. Well, I'll say big picture, that's why I have a job, right? That's why people would hire me, right?
yeah.
So, and that's also why we start by getting rid of and releasing the baggage. Because if someone is seeing life through the emotional baggage and the limiting beliefs, you're right, they may not know what they want. The amount of clarity that someone gets after releasing those things and until someone experiences it, if you talk to my clients, and I believe most of them would agree with this, that if everyone knew what it was like on the other side of a breakthrough session, everyone would go through a breakthrough session. And until someone has that experience, it's like a number of things in life that until you actually experience it, you don't know what that's like. So, excuse me, that that is part of the process. So are there certain things, even if I gave you a list of like these are the things that prove to be a good life or that prove to deliver on a good life? Well, if values are kind of murky, if someone, has inner conflicts around them and stuff like that, is there a world where someone could be doing all of the right things and still end up unhappy? I'm sure there is, right? I can't say yes or no to that. And What I do know from my experience working with the people that I've worked with and just through my own experiences, that once someone is clear on what's important to them, and that's why that process is so important, that they may not get it right away. There may be a little bit of trial and error, and we have models to move through things. And that progression toward a goal that's in alignment with their values, I mean, people do experience more joy. And I generally like joy or fulfillment more than happiness, because I think happiness for some people it's a little murky. And yes, I do think that once we get rid of those things, we get clear on what's important and start moving toward those things. Again, like that, like big picture, that's why I have a job, because that is what I help people do. I do think people can get there potentially faster than they may think they can.
Yeah. And I mean, but that's like why we're all here, right? Or why somebody, I would imagine, that's what we all want is happiness or joy and
Right.
fulfillment. I, obviously, if you could get to the point where you are just ultimately happy every day, I don't know if there's anybody who's just like consistently happy all the time, but
Do
that's
you
the
mind if I comment
ultimate.
on that?
Yeah, I'm actually curious to what you think about that.
So two things come to mind. And please forgive me. One of these, I forget the gentleman's name. So I'll get to that here in a moment. I heard this great quote, and it's that the proper form of being is a constant state of becoming. The proper form of being is a constant state of becoming. That how do I be a great leader? By constantly becoming a better leader. How do I be a great communicator? By constantly becoming a great communicator. So this proper form of being is a constant state of becoming. So there now, when we couple that with this other idea, I think there's something here that, and please forgive me, I forget the gentleman's name. He had this exercise. I heard him on a podcast. And what he said was his coach had him do this, that I know I'm successful when. And rather than having this thing of and this goes back to this idea of the proper form of being as a constant state of becoming, he had these three criteria that he knew that he was successful when these three things were checked off. And one of them was something like his passive income exceeded his yearly expenses. It was something like that. Right. So these were somewhat career focused, and that's how he defined success. And what was nice about that was once he had these things, it wasn't that he wasn't going to keep like working harder and, developing more and creating more and that type stuff. It's that he had a list that he was comfortable with saying, hey, I know I'm successful when these three things are checked off. Right. When these three things are my life, I can call myself a success. And he was and one of those things was what was like being able to work on the things that he was excited to work on, as opposed to having to do things that he wasn't excited to work on, right? And we're all going to be in those phases of our life. It's in some way, shape, or form, I believe. And those were his criteria. He had these three things. So by working on getting those three things, once he had them, he could say, "Hey, I know I'm successful when," and he was still becoming better at all the things he was having fun doing. So I think that yeah, I think when we start to look at things like that, that it's not some stagnant like how do I be happy? Well, it's constantly by doing the things that make me happy, right? And I don't mean in some hedonistic way, living a life, in pursuit of something worthwhile that's in alignment with what's most important to us. Something like that.
Yeah, and I kind of feel like that's like kind of like my point with the discipline thing, where it's like I kind of feel like if I'm at, and I think a lot of this stuff, like I said before, I think a lot of this stuff gets murky with the money thing because I feel like you can't really be fully happy. And
Mhm.
I don't know, maybe I'm wrong about that because I know that there are some people who are happy living off of, a little amount of money. But obviously, like you're probably not going to be happy if you don't have enough money to pay the bills. You
Right.
might be doing everything that you want to be doing, but if you can't pay the bills, there's going to be this constant like lingering beast that's coming after you. But I feel like it's kind of like because of money and capitalism, it kind of creates this like rat race where like, and then you also hear the thing where like no amount of money is ever enough. Like you want to make $100,000 a year, you make that, you're still not happy. You make a million, you keep wanting more and more and more. So I kind of feel like there's this constant battle between like making a lot of money, but then being happy. And I don't feel like making a lot of money necessarily makes you happy. So you have to find that like perfect life, work life balance. But I also feel like with discipline, and this is why I brought the discipline thing, where it's like if I go to work and I have an 8 hour day of delivering or whatever I'm doing, and I'm just in a shitty mood the whole day, it's like even though it's the way that I really feel and I really want to be truthful to myself and to other people to a certain extent, I want to be shitty, but it's like I want to be able to be truthful, like whatever mood I'm in. But I think the goal is to kind of like, and this is like the hard part, is like to control your emotions and be like, you know what? I have an 8 hour day of working. I don't want to be here. It's Monday morning, but I'm going to be in a good mood. And it kind of goes back to that positive mental attitude thing, but in a more of like a practical way. So if you're able, and that's like the hard part, I think, is, but it's like if you're able to control that emotion and do what you need to do, and this is kind of like the same question as I asked before, but I felt like I didn't really fully get an answer. Maybe you did give me the answer and I just didn't hear it the right way. But will that if you're disciplined and you do what you need to do, will that ultimately lead to joy and fulfillment?
Right. Well, I think that that's the subjective nature of values, and values and beliefs are determined by a handful of things, right? I mean, society, culture, all of those things. So is have like when it comes to discipline, and there's a great book called The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan, and they talk about this idea of discipline that people, it's oftentimes people who look disciplined, what they have are good habits. That discipline is only needed up until the point where the habit's created, then the habit kind of takes over. That's generalizing how that idea works. And the idea is that if someone can just get to the place where they form a habit, and if we loosely define habit as something that feels weird if I don't do it, then the discipline's only needed up to the point where they form the habit, right? And then it's just, it feels like it's on autopilot. It's not really, and that's kind of how it feels. Well, if it looks like someone's living a disciplined life, my hallucination is that because we don't have that willpower to do that all the time, they've just formed really good habits. If it, like, if the question is, if we do A, B, and C, will someone live a happy life? I mean, a lot of like, I'm not saying it's subjective in the sense that we know some things that do create a generally happy life when it comes to money. And, that idea of like, you're right. Like, I'm not ignorant to the fact that if someone's wondering how they're going to pay their bills, that's going to cause some stress in their life. I'm on board with that. And there have been studies that have shown how different thresholds do create different levels of happiness. And you're right. There, if you ask a person who makes $100,000, do they make a lot of money? They're going to be like something like, no, the person who makes 200,000 makes a lot of money. You ask the person who makes 200,000 if they make a lot of money. They're like, no, it's 400,000. So yeah, there is this comparison. And this is where I think that all of these things come together to say, hey, if someone is living a life, like I know people where they know their number. If I make $330,000, I'm making this up, for example, and I've heard people say something similar. Well, that's all the money I need to do everything I want to do in this life. That's important to me. They could get to 330, go live on an island somewhere and not care what the billionaires are doing, right? So there is a subjective nature to it, and that's based on values, which are going to be based on culture, school, upbringing, potentially faith, all of those things. So if someone has discipline and they do X, Y, and Z, are they going to be happy, filled with joy, and feel fulfilled? I mean, not if they're doing the things that aren't in alignment with what's most important to them. And that's why we have those hierarchy of values, both in how we live our life and in those individual areas of life. So and please forgive me, I'm not trying to skirt the question. It's just to say that discipline in certain areas, I can't promise is going to deliver on happiness or joy or fulfillment if it's the right things. And those right things are generally determined by the individual and what we just know about living an okay life, then yes.
Yeah. Well, like the way I look at things, it seems to be like different than the way that most people looks at things. But like in my mind, there's a lot of things where it's I just want to be able to do what I want to do on a daily basis, and if I can get to that point where I'm doing that, um, I'm happy. Like I said before, I'm not super motivated by money. As long as I have enough money, I'd rather be doing what I want to be doing and have complete control and freedom. So I guess leading into my next question, which I wanted to
Mhm.
ask you, was if I came to you and I said, and then after this, I ideally I want to get into like the Robert Sapolsky type
Mhm.
philosophy type stuff. But if, and I just want to make sure we have enough time for that. But
Yeah.
so if I come to you and I said, okay, so here's my deal. I want to be able to do what I want to do. Like I told you, I really like this Amazon Flex job. There are some downsides to it, but then I also want to be like a YouTuber and or a podcaster.
Mhm.
And I know both are kind of like different, but I'm going to try and like link them together. In terms of the Amazon Flex thing, the great thing about it is the freedom. I enjoy doing the job. I literally kind of like want to do the job. I'm like, if there's a route, I want to take a route. But the downsides to it, and like a lot of people can look at, and this is kind of like my point. Like my girlfriend's very good with it, but I feel like some people might look at it and be like, oh, well, that's not a professional, quote unquote, professional job. And there are some legitimate downsides to it. Like I said, they don't have like the benefits. They don't have 401k. They don't have health, all that kind of stuff. But I just enjoy doing it. I'm able to do it when I want to do it. I don't have a boss looking over my shoulder. Um, I do it on my own terms. Um, would you honestly just be like, okay, then that's what you should do. Just figure out a way to do it, or would you kind of be like, well, it's not that practical in terms of quote unquote making a good living or whatever. You know what I mean? Like what would your advice be to me on that?
So I'm going to put this in the context of someone in that scenario hiring me as their coach, right? So if someone were to come to me and say, "Hey, I do this thing," right? If someone were to say to me, "Hey, I do this thing, it's giving me everything I want. Can you help me?" Well, there's nothing really to help with, right? If someone feels like there's a gap between where they are and where they desire to be in their career, well, then the question is, well, first, let's get rid of whatever stuff could be potentially holding you back. Let's get rid of the baggage, right? Emotional, the limiting beliefs, that type of stuff. Well, let's get rid of that. And then let's set a goal as to where you desire to be. So if someone is fine with what they're doing, they probably wouldn't hire me, right? Because there's no gap, there's nowhere they want to go, there's no change they want to create or more fulfillment or joy. If someone were to come to me and say, hey, I'm in this spot, I don't know if I'm really doing what I need to do, cool, let's explore it. Let's release everything. Let's craft a goal of what life could look like. And once we get rid of those potentially limiting beliefs or emotional baggage or inner conflicts, the world opens up. So the advice I would give is, well, are you like, does everything feel good now? Like, are you doing what you want to do spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically, environmentally, socially, occupationally, financially? Where's the gap? And if someone's like, there isn't one, well, then we just shake hands and go our separate ways. If someone's like, well, there's a gap here, then we explore it and work through the process.
Well, I think the gap would be like it's in my mind, like I'm fine with what I'm doing. I'm happy with what I'm doing.
Yep.
But like I said, there are some things that I think other people no I mean nobody's recently has really said anything to me about it, but there are some things it's kind of hard because it's like I said, everything is kind of tricky because it's like, well, I want to do this, but this doesn't maybe pay as much as this or whatever. But it's like with this current job, I really enjoy it. It's perfect for me. But there are some setbacks. Like for instance, there is wear and tear on my car. I'm not getting the benefits. But overall, I'm happy doing the job. So it's not like this perfect situation where I come to you and I'm like, I'm happy. Yes, I'm happy doing the job, but
Yep.
there are some negatives to it. I'm probably not making enough money realistically. I'm getting by on it, but it's kind of like should I do better? Like you know what I mean? It's like should I go and like strive? Because I feel like so much of society is telling you to do better, better, better. But it's like if you don't really, what if you just don't even like really want to do better? You know, it's um most people that you talk to, it's like, oh, well, you should go, especially when you're younger and you're going to college and all that. It's like you need to get a good job and you need to be a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, or whatever. But it's like, what if I don't want to do that? What if I know that I'm going to be unhappy doing those things. I'd rather do this gig job, right? Drive around my car. I don't really care if it quote unquote looks bad, but there is some truth. I'm not making $100,000 a year, and to live in where I live, Southern California, um, and where do you live? If you don't want me asking.
Yeah, I live East Coast in South
Yeah.
Carolina.
Okay, okay. I think I already knew that, but I just forgot. Yeah.
Yep.
So to live in Southern California, you need to make. I think it might be $75,000 a year or whatever it
Right.
is. I'm not making that. So I'm there. There are definitely some hurdles in terms of money. You see what I'm saying? So yeah, I'm happy
Okay.
overall. I love what I do, but I'm not making enough money. What should I do?
Got
You know
it.
what I
Okay.
mean? Yeah.
Totally. So then it sounds like, and this is the part as a coach you know, we'd potentially explore. We still start with the release work because we need to figure out if there's anything clouding the vision. Then the goal, it sounds like, and again, this is off a quick explanation that you just gave me. Well, then it's saying like, hey, what could that future look like? Like, what would that look like? What is making $75,000 a year look like? Where are you now? I'm making up numbers, right? Let's say you're at 60,000. There's a $15,000 gap. Well, once we identify values, we craft that compelling future. Well, then I gave the four requisites for change. Once we start taking action, there's a model that I use called the five principles of success. You have to know what you want, right? So in this case, the arbitrary or the fake example I'm using of an extra $15,000, you have to know that you need to make an extra $15,000. Well, then we start taking action on it. What could that mean? Extra Amazon Flex shifts? Could it mean doing, monetizing podcasts? Like, what are the options we have to take action on? And then once we start taking action, we have some sensory acuity. Is it working or is it not working? If it's working, we stay the course. If it's not, we have some behavioral flexibility, which says we just look at different options, right? We stay course on the goal and we just create different options for ourselves. And then throughout the process, we're operating from a physiology and psychology of excellence. That's healthy body, healthy mind, essentially. So again, release work, create a compelling future, take action, maintain focus. When we take action, we have to know what we want. We have to start taking action on it, have some sensory acuity, have behavioral flexibility, and operate from a physiology and psychology of excellence. And we're just going to constantly run these patterns until we get to the desired outcome. So I think identifying what that gap is, and that's what I was going back to earlier, wherever we are now, where do we need to be to create that life? And then coming up with the options that make sense based on your values and beliefs and things of that nature, and then find a plan to move us toward that desired outcome.
In terms of like the gap and like filling that gap, do you mean like kind of like get an extra another job or like just work maybe do this more to fill the money gap? Is that what you're saying? Like kind of like come up with something else to make the difference, basically.
Potentially. So one of the things that as a coach, and I'm going to use my water bottle here. One of the things I learned early on as a coach was that, so let's say a client were to come to me and this is their challenge. This water bottle represents their challenge. Well, my job as a coach is to keep my client's eyes on the challenge. My eyes stay on my client, because the moment I turn my head and move away from my eyes on the client to the challenge, I then become a professional problem solver, because I want to work with my client for them to figure out the potential solutions that make sense to them. And I've had some clients in the past that come up with some solutions, and in the back of my mind, and this may sound terrible, I'm like, good luck with that. And then they make it work, right? So it's, are there some situations where I may present a model or maybe I give a suggestion? Sure. Like there may be books I recommend or something like that. And those ideas, if someone's like, hey, I'm open to exploring different jobs, like that's an option. I'm open to exploring what it would look like to take on extra shifts. That's an option. I'm open to exploring other options. I'll look on YouTube and see what people have done with some other things to create income, podcasting or YouTubing. All of those options are on the table. There's this idea. It's called the law of requisite variety. It comes to us from cybernetics, and NLP has taken this, and when we apply it to people, not systems, that the idea is that the person with the most flexibility, or we can say the person with the most options, has the greatest influence over the environment or over the system. So if someone says, well, I need to make this extra money, this is the only way I'm going to do it, and that way doesn't work, well, then they're out of luck. If they're like, hey, I have these 3 or 4 options that I'm willing to take a look at to create this extra income, they have a greater chance of creating that desired outcome. So it's about creating options that are in alignment with what's important to them and using those options to move forward and trying things out, right? It's being curious and then modeling success And then we're running those patterns to continuously move closer to that desired outcome. And if we aren't moving closer, then we create more options and make some adjustments.
And what is cyber? You mentioned cybernetics. What is cybernetics?
So so this is outside of my wheelhouse. I just know where it comes from. So cybernetics, it's something, and loose definition here, the study of systems and things of that nature. It's you may be from there was a book written, Psycho-Cybernetics. That was an old personal development book, still very relevant for some people today, and that has to do with like systems of the mind and stuff. Cybernetics, though, it's my understanding, it's systems and things of that nature. So anyone
Okay.
watching this, they can comment wherever you post this. That is not my wheelhouse. So please don't use this as the intro clip of what we're talking about.
Yeah, no problem. And then as
Yeah.
far as the first thing that you guys do, I forgot I'm forgetting the name of what it's called, but you get something out or whatever. Is that like mainly kind of getting rid of the fear? What's it called? One of the first things you do is
So in the breakthrough session, we start with release work, and
yeah,
one of the
release
primary techniques
release
is
work.
mental and emotional release is the primary technique used there.
And what do you mean by that? Is that kind of like getting rid of fear type thing?
Anger, sadness, fear, hurt, guilt, and some other emotions that may be specific to the individual.
And trying to get rid of all those things.
So it's getting rid of the baggage, because so there's really no such thing as a negative emotion. We have all of our emotions for a reason. Okay. What's important though is that it's proportionate, it's warranted to the event. So to give you or to give you a metaphor, imagine you're a little baby, right? You're 6 months old, you're in your crib, you're playing with a toy, and it's time to feed you. So your parents take the toy from you, and you have this little bag inside of you, and you put that little instance of anger, right? You don't know what it is. You're 6 months old. You just know you feel something, you're angry. You put that little instance of anger inside that little bag. Well, as time goes on, those little instances of anger throughout your life, that bag's getting fuller and fuller and fuller. Sure, we release some of this over time, and we have this bag of just this baggage that we've collected throughout the years. So what happens in the moment, we feel anger, for example, and it acts like a magnet and it draws up that bag of anger. So we don't, not all of it, right? And we don't feel a proportionate or warranted amount of that emotion. I mean, imagine, I'm sure people can think of a situation where they see it on YouTube, right? Someone cuts in front of someone in like a fast food line. And what do? They throw a punch. Well, many people would say that that's a disproportionate or unwarranted response given the scenario. So, what we do through this process of mental and emotional release is those bags of that emotional baggage, we just empty them out. We empty them out using mental and emotional release. So, it's not that we don't feel anger moving forward. We just feel the present or warranted amount. We just don't have all of that stuff raising up or rising up from the past.
Okay, and would you, like I said before, like how like it feels kind of like society is like you need to do this, 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 and to lead a successful adult life. And it's like,
Hmm.
to be honest with you, I don't really feel like I'm doing any of them, nor do I kind of like in a lot of situations really want to. But do you adhere to that to be like a, like a successful adult or whatever? Like you need to have this kind of job, like you need to be married, you need to have kids, or like would you just tell your client like kind of like do whatever makes you happy, do whatever you want to do?
Well, I wouldn't tell them to. I I wouldn't do either necessarily. I mean, I that if generally speaking, someone's going to come to like, it's rare where I have the person that says, you know what, my relationships are too good. I have too much money. I'm 30 seconds away from enlightenment. Those aren't the people who are generally coming to me, right? It's something like, you know what, I got divorced 3 years ago, and I'm having trouble moving forward and going out and finding someone else, right? That's a very realistic scenario. Now, assuming they don't need a licensed professional, and there's just, you know what, I'm just hung up on this marriage. Can you help me? Then I explore, make sure I'm the right fit. And assuming I'm the right fit, well, then I wouldn't tell them that they need to date people. They already want to do that. I wouldn't even tell them how to date people. I would help them get unstuck using some of these techniques so they could do the things they already want to do. So I had a client who had a fear of heights, wanted to do a ropes course, worked on the fear of heights. They went and had a great time at the ropes course. They went skydiving. It's not that they weren't going to do those things, they just had more fun without that kind of fear lingering in the back of their mind. So I don't know if that answers your question. I wouldn't necessarily tell them what to do. Generally speaking, they know what they want to do. There's just something holding them back.
But yeah, like what if somebody came to you and they're like, I'm 40, I'm not married, I don't have kids, my job is, I mean, honestly, like it sounds like me, but it's like my job is doing, Amazon Flex or whatever. But like, you know what? This I'm comfortable doing this. I'm happy doing this.
Right.
Like, do you look, what do you think like maybe there's something wrong with this? You know what I mean? Like this person just hasn't fully, because I feel like it sounds like you're more of the type of person who's like do what you want to do. But I feel like most people, even psychologists I've talked to, are always kind of pushing you to move forward, especially in terms of like responsibility. But it's like somebody like me, it's like I'm trying to like have as little responsibility as possible. Like, you know what I mean? It's like I don't really want to be a CEO of a company. I don't really want to make $1 million a year. I just want to be happy and like, kind of like stress free. But I kind of feel like there's this push towards, well, you need to take on stress kind of thing. And like, you know what I
Okay.
mean?
Okay. So, well, Mike, I want to be careful here because with what I'm about to like, I'm going to answer your question then maybe, or potentially a little too bluntly. And my hallucination is then if that's so, do I agree that taking on responsibility is important? Absolutely. Like I'm on board with that. And it's not do what you want. It's let's figure out the things that are most important to you. And once we release everything, let's figure out what you really want. My hallucination is, and I don't know this, right? Again, we've only known each other for a short period of time, is that as with everyone, myself included, we all have baggage that's murkying the way we see the world. We all have attitudes, beliefs. We all have these things. Some are murkying, some are just how we need to live our lives, or how we are living our lives, I should say. That my hallucination is without the baggage, your view on those things changes. Because there's a difference between moving toward what we want and moving away from what we don't want. So, and I'll just use a snippet of what you just said. There's a difference between being stress free and living a life of calm, right? Because one's moving away from, one's moving towards something. So, an analogy I learned from one of my coaches, or yeah, the idea that if you're in a house that's burning down, you're only going to run out of the house far enough to get away from the danger. It's not going to compel you to run a marathon. So if someone is living a life where all they're doing is moving away from what they don't want, they're only going to do enough to be comfortable. If they're focused on what they want, then that's going to compel them to create something differently. If my only goal is just not to be broke, I'm willing to take a much different job, for example, than if I desire to create abundance. Now, if I'm held back by limiting beliefs of like, you know what, I don't deserve wealth. I don't deserve abundance. I don't deserve a good life. Well, once I get rid of that, that may allow me to move forward toward creating abundance rather than just focusing on what I don't want and avoiding that. So there are a lot of moving parts here. And that's why we start with the release work to make sure we see things as without that, without those lenses, if you will.
Yeah, and it's obviously like we're not able to do the whole
Right.
thing here, but I feel like there's this cultural push to be a certain type of person, and it's kind of like, well, what if you just don't really want to be that type of person? And you could say, oh, well, there's things blocking, there's like fear and anger and resentment or whatever blocking the things that you really want to do. But I kind of look at things as like I said before, it's like I want to live my life as simply as possible. I'm not, like I said, I'm not, there's nothing that I'm really trying. I went to college. I mean, maybe I guess sometimes as like things change and like you have difference of opinions. I do a lot, but it's like, for the most part, I just want to I want to like my job. I want to make enough money to live, and I just want to live my life. I want to be free to be able to do what I want. And it's like, I personally don't look at that as being a negative, but I think that some people do, as they think, oh, like either you're not doing enough or you're not living to your full potential. And it's like, I feel like when people say living to your full potential, it usually means make more money. But then it's like, I don't think that money creates happiness or joy or fulfillment. Like I said before, you got to make enough money to, you want to make enough money to survive and maybe a little bit more than that. But it's like, I look at things different than I feel like most people do, where it's like, I'm not striving to be more. I don't really care. And I'm not, it's not like a nihilistic or anything. It's just kind of like, I'm happy doing what I'm doing and I want to keep it that way. And I know that there's a ton that you could go off on that. I'd be interested to hear, but I do kind of like want to move to the next thing, which would
Hmm.
be, um, so I'm doing this, I'm doing the podcast, I'm doing YouTube. When I first saw the numbers that I needed to get monetized on YouTube, I was like, there's no way that I'm going to be able to do that. I have reached that goal and even maybe a little bit more than I expected with the help of like AI and technology and stuff. So, but then like with the podcast, it's not getting the numbers that I want. So it's like, um, I kind of have this thing. Like I was doing the podcast, I stopped for a year, I got back into it, and I want to do the podcast. I want to be the next Joe Rogan or whatever. You know what I mean? Not literally, but I want to be the next big thing. But if it's not getting the numbers, it's not getting the numbers, and I kind of like need to like do stuff that does get the numbers if I want to make money, which I do doing this. So I guess and then also one other thing is like there are certain times when I'm like, you know what, I can interview whoever I want. I could, if I really tried hard enough, I can get so and so on the podcast and I can get bigger names. I also enjoy talking to people like you and everybody else that I find on Reddit or whatever else. But in terms of the practicality of it, I guess, and kind of like sometimes getting down on it, what would you say in terms of, yeah, like what should I do in terms of that? Um, yeah.
Yeah, great
And
question.
then one other thing, real quick, before I
Yeah.
there are some times when I'm like, you know what, I'm really positive, and I'm like, I could really turn this into something. But then there are other times when I either just don't do it, or I'm even kind of like down on myself, like, oh, I'm not good enough or whatever. Or it's like I just don't. Going back to the discipline thing, instead of being like, I need to do this, this, and this to make this podcast successful, I just don't do it, and I just keep doing the same thing I do, or I just stop. So
Right.
what would your advice be for that? Yeah.
So two things come to mind. And again, I want to be respectful of the fact that you're giving me little snippets, right? Like it's not, I'm getting small parts of this. That,
Correct. I'm trying to fit as much in as like,
yeah.
in a short period of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I get it. Right. Well, I was saying I just want to be respectful of your life, right? That I'm not trying to pull it apart based on 30-second snippets, right? So I want to be respectful of you as a person. That
Yeah.
two things come to mind. One, the advice that I generally give my clients that when it comes to stuff like that is that keeping, now I let's start with what I'm not saying. I don't tell my clients to look at their goals necessarily every day. I think there's a plus to that. And the things I advise my clients to do at least once a week, generally when they're planning, read their compelling futures. The clients who've worked with me for a while, they have compelling futures for each of those 8 areas of life. Review their values for each of those areas of life. That way, what they're able to do is make decisions based on their values. It's reminding them of what's most important to them. And those compelling futures are crafted in a way that we call them a compelling future. Like the name's intentional. It's not just a goal. That when I have my clients craft these things, they are so compelling that it's more compelling than the reasons for not doing it. So having these well-crafted, compelling futures, looking at their values, some other things I help with my clients with are things like developing their big why they're doing what they're doing, having their avatar, that who they're becoming in the future. And that if someone is consistently looking at the things that are most important to them, their values, looking at the compelling futures they have for the different areas of their life, they have a clear understanding of why they're doing what they're doing, and they know who they're becoming in the future. Well, that gets them moving, right? Because those things are crafted in a way that it's more compelling than the reasons not to do it. So, one is getting as clear as possible on what you want and then reminding yourself of that as regularly as you can or as regularly as you need to. And then the second part of that is a book recommendation. And it's this book called The Practicing Mind by Thomas Sterner. And it's my most read book. It's I've gifted it more than any other book I've ever gifted. And I think if not 100%, it's really, really close to all my clients have listened to and or read this book because it's the first book I recommend all of them. And what this book does, it's the philosophy is not new. It's process over product. He just explains it in a way in that book that I think resonates differently than any other person I've heard explain this process over product mentality. And it's the idea that it's not a like, for example, I was in sales for years before I became a coach. I guess technically I'm still in sales, and I was picking up the phone a lot when I was in sales. And it's this idea that, let's say I need to make 100 phone calls in a day, right? I know that's the number of calls I need to make. Well, I don't need to make 100 phone calls. I need to make one phone call, and I need to make sure that call is perfect. Then when I'm done with that phone call, and if it's not perfect, I learn from it. And then all I have to do now is make one phone call. So I don't need to make 100 phone calls. All I need to do is make one phone call. Then when I'm done with that one, all I need to do is make one phone call. And then when I'm done with that, all I need to do is make one phone call. So I'm not making 100 phone calls. That sounds like a lot. I'm making one phone call, and I'm just going to do that 100 times. And there's a difference in that mentality. So when it comes to this idea of process, that you have an aim goal, like you have a direction that you're heading in, you know the numbers you want to get. So you know what you want, you're taking action on it. You're recording these, you're putting out podcasts and stuff like that. You have an awareness that, hey, it's working on YouTube. The podcast isn't getting the numbers that I desire. So now the question is, maybe there's some behavioral flexibility that's needed, or maybe it's just more time. As you're going through the process, though, and I say you specifically and just anyone listening, you generally, what that entails is doing one podcast the best you can. Then what happens? You only have to do another podcast. Do that one the best you can. Then it's time for the next podcast. Do that one the best you can. And it's process over product. And we're learning and growing with each step. So while it's not specific advice to a podcast, it is to say that there is something about process over product. We keep that North Star in mind. We keep that direction that we're moving in mind. And then the only thing I have to do in the moment is do the best I can with this one.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I've come to the conclusion that, like, to a certain extent, I really feel like, especially with like I can't be a professional NBA player, but with YouTube or with this podcast, pretty much most of the stuff that I actually want to do, I really probably could turn it into something. It's just a matter of actually doing that.
Right.
And and a lot of it has to do with confidence. Like I said before, most of it comes down to discipline and doing. But then there's also the factor that, is it oversaturated? Is it oversaturated? I don't really want to say am I good enough, because I think that should be just something that I strive towards being. But then, is this something that's consumable? Like, if you're selling something that people aren't going to buy, it's just not going to sell. Um, I personally think that it is, but it's just a matter of doing it the right way and being disciplined and having the confidence and just doing it, basically. But there's also the factor of, like, no one knows the future and no one knows what's going to happen. So making the decisions is hard, because it's like, well, especially with me, with the anxiety and stuff, it's like, making decisions is hard because you don't know the future, so you can't make a perfect decision. Like, should I do this? Should I do that? You know what I mean? So I think that ultimately it's hard, but I feel like we can go on and on about any of these subjects we talked about, but I do want to get to, and it sounds like you know enough about it, but it's like, I guess just like consciousness, and then you brought up Robert Sapolsky with, he believes in, we don't have any free will, right? So, in terms of, yeah, just consciousness in general, what are your views on consciousness? And obviously, as they relate to, like, what you do and psychology and everything else. Because I don't know too much about it, but I've become really interested in, like, psychology or consciousness, AI, metaphysics, that are like practical metaphysics. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so what are your viewpoints on consciousness, and also, do you feel like it affects kind of well-being and all that? You know what I mean? Meditation too, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, great question. And yeah, this is what I read about and learn about when I'm not coaching. So these are we're going to put everything you just mentioned kind of in my hobbies bucket, which I spend a lot of time on. So I think that having a definition of what we're talking about, I think is important here. And the definition that I've kind of adopted when it comes to consciousness is that it's something to be like that thing, right? That it's not just lights out. That and I listen to people like Sam Harris and Robert Sapolsky and other people talk. Well, I guess not so much Robert Sapolsky when it comes to consciousness. And there's this essay written decades ago. What is it like to be a bat? Bless you. What is it like to be a bat? And this idea is that you know we don't know what it's like to be a bat, and is there some sort of like bat consciousness that if you were to trade place with a bat, that it would be something to be a bat. Okay. So right now I know I'm conscious. It's something to be me. Right. So I'm aware of that. And I'm assuming it's something to be Micah. Right. So this idea of consciousness, the way I see it and the definition that I generally use is that it's something to be like that thing. That if you were to trade place with, it would just want to be lights out. Right. So if there's anything in this universe that matters, then it's consciousness. And I've learned this through my meditation practice and who I listen to for meditation and some of these concepts that there's consciousness and then and then there's its contents that I'm not seeing you because of consciousness. I'm seeing you as consciousness, that everything is just appearing in consciousness. So that idea, yeah, does that affect how I coach? Absolutely, right? Because I do believe that that there's an objective world that we're having a subjective experience of. Like I do think my desk exists right here. Now, how I touch it and stuff like that, am I forming those feelings and like the colors I see and things like that? Is that being constructed in my mind? Sure. And I do think there's an objective world that I'm having a subjective experience of. And the only way I'm able to have that experience is because of consciousness. I'm aware of it as consciousness.
So would you say like you're it kind of sounds like you're like a mix, but more of like a materialist or an idealist,
Yeah,
or
yes,
which one?
I think materialist
Okay.
describes me. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm still kind of like learning, even though I'm, want to talk about it and I'm interested in it, I am still learning. So, I've talked to some people who believe that like we're literally living in consciousness and we're just kind of like, and that would be idealism. And then there's materialism. I'm sure but I'm just explaining to the audience. Like this is really here. So you believe that like all of this stuff is really material, but you're just kind of, but all the consciousness is happening in your brain, right?
Correct. Right. Now, wait, now, just so we're clear, could this be a simulation and like, millions of years down the road, our humans just figured out how to map consciousness into, let's say, a big game of The Sims? I'm not going to rule that out. And as far as I know, it's that I think, therefore I am, right? The fact that I'm thinking and I'm aware of this, that's how I know I'm conscious. So if there's anything, and I'm using the words of Sam Harris here, if there's anything that's not an illusion, it's consciousness. Like this, I am conscious.
Yeah, and I listen to Sam Harris too, but is would he be considered like a materialist?
I haven't heard him use that word, and I would imagine so because of the way he talks about the brain, that if we were to move, for example, your brain and put it in another body, you would go with your brain. And I've heard him have that conversation with some pretty smart people on his podcast. So I believe so, and I really don't know. Like I would guess, and it's not like I've spoken to him and asked him the question. I would believe so.
Yeah. And so what are all the have you heard of like idealism?
I'm familiar with the term and the I mean I know how I describe myself, and I also know that if someone there are some floating definitions or just yeah, so I've heard people say it, and I would consider myself a materialist.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, I mean I hadn't even heard the term, and I had some guy on like over a year ago, and he was from Saudi Arabia, and he was an idealist, and I hadn't even heard that term, and I didn't even know what that meant, that we're living in consciousness. I kind of thought that everybody had the same viewpoint, which was essentially materialist, like this is really here, and we're just, we're consciously viewing it from our brain or whatever. Um, but what are all the different types of theories out there? Like there's materialism, there's idealism. I've heard of like dualism. Would that be where it's like um you have like a spirit, or not a spirit, but like a body and soul? Is that what like dualism is? Do you know?
Yeah. I've heard people like I'm not a philosophy major, and again, this is one of my hobbies. And yeah, so I would say I'm a non-dualist, right? That it's not that the and I think this so I'm going to use something I learned through my meditation practice that so there's a view that sometimes when people meditate, they're sitting on the bank of a river and they're watching their thoughts flow by in the river. And it's this idea that there's an observer to those thoughts. And I think most people would agree that's more of a dualist view, that there's this observer observing these thoughts. Well, what I've grown to appreciate and I believe is that it's not that there's an observer sitting on the bank watching the thoughts flow by in the river. It's that there's only the river. That I'm not having an experience, I am the experience. That any idea, like me being Ray in my head, that's all part of consciousness. So I'm not separate from those thoughts. I am the experience itself. And that's where and that's why I'd consider myself a non-dualist.
And that's where I get like a little confused, because wouldn't that be the same as idealism? Like, what's the difference between dualism and idealism?
Can you define idealism for me as you learned it?
Well, as the way the guy described it to me, and the last guy that I had on was also, I guess, technically an idealist, but like like this is all consciousness. Like we are living inside consciousness. There is really no separation. But it's hard for me to explain all this stuff because I'm new to it. But it's like there is really no separation between, like, materialism would be like you said, my brain is looking at this desk and this desk is really here. But in idealism, this desk like really isn't. It is here, but it's like it's just part of consciousness. Like I guess the easiest way to explain it that I am able to understand it would be like if we are in a simulation and everything's simulated, it would almost be like if that simulation was consciousness and we're just kind of like inside of the consciousness. So when I'm talking to you right now, like you're not really there. Well, you are really there, but it's like you're just another person inside of consciousness. And I think that some of these people even believe like if I look away and then when I look back at you, it's like literally kind of
Oh,
rendering. Kind of like the
okay.
whole thing of like Schrodinger's cat, where it's like if you don't look at, Schrodinger's cat, if you don't look at the cat, or when you're not looking at it, it could either be alive or dead. Well, it sounds just crazy, but and I'm still, like I said, I'm still learning all this stuff, so
Right.
I'm probably not the best person to be learning from. But when you get down and you look at quantum physics and quantum mechanics, like this desk isn't really, as you probably know, this desk isn't really like a solid object. It's made of tiny little particles that are all kind of like moving around, and it's almost more like kind of like a wave type function. So it's not that crazy from a scientific perspective to believe that like all of this really is just consciousness. Does that make sense?
Okay. So,
And
when it,
real quick, I would consider myself the same as you, a materialist. Like, I really believe that this is here. I don't believe that we're living in consciousness. I believe the simulation theory could be true, but I believe you are really there. I mean, even in idealism, you would really be there, but we would all just be subjects inside of consciousness. I mean, it's really crazy. When I heard this, I just wanted to learn more basically about it. So
so I believe that your experience of this conversation is only because of consciousness. That right. So like you seeing, hearing, feeling, all of these things are appearances in consciousness. That if anything matters again in this universe, it's consciousness. And my experience, like when I touch this, I'm not touching it and feeling it because of consciousness. I'm touching it as consciousness. And this is the non-dualist part. And I hope I'm explaining this correctly because or that I'm not separate from the experience. I am the experience. Like Ray, like there's not some like Ray sitting in my head, like looking out. It's just they're seeing. So, yes, that when it comes to quantum physics, and there's not a unifying theory, and one of my, I'll say, pet peeves in the personal development world is when people who are not quantum physicists are talking about quantum physics and using some of the studies that you mentioned, right? And there are a lot of people that talk about this, and I'm not going to name names, and they talk about these things and use them as reasons like I believe the moon exists even if I'm not looking at it, right? Like I don't think it, like you said, like renders, like there. And I've heard now there are all sorts of theories. I just don't happen to believe those things, and that's coming from actual like quantum physicists. Like I don't, I don't know. I think that Dunning-Kruger, the Dunning-Kruger effect kicks in some situations when we start talking, or when I hear some people in the personal development space talk about these things, they don't they don't know enough to know that they don't know much at all. And that's there are a lot of people out there talking about these things that I just don't think know a lot about them. And that's why I like listening to actual quantum physicists talk about those things.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like, I mean, I don't know enough about it. So like you've brought up a number of things such as even though Robert Sapolsky, I don't think is necessarily like he's not like a philosopher, but like Sam Harris and
Right.
that yeah, I don't know enough about it to explain it, but I'm just trying to learn more. And it's like
Right.
when I hear the different theories on it, it almost kind of it's hard to like kind of like differentiate the two. And then like just like what you just said with these people, I don't really know if they like literally think like the moon isn't there until you look at it. But one person I've been listening to recently is, do you know Donald Hoffman?
Yeah, I've heard him interviewed.
Yeah.
He's got some
So
interesting ideas.
yeah, so he's and it's like I said before with you about like the pseudoscientific thing. It's like obviously I want everything to be based in science, and I believe that the NLP is, but I'm interested in all of them, but obviously I want it to be based in science. Like if I'm talking with someone who doesn't know what they're talking about, I don't want that. But it's like I am interested in all the different theories. And so Donald Hoffman recently came on and basically said, according to him, I mean, it's all very hard. That's the thing is, I'm not going to do a good job explaining it, but it's like it's all very hard to even explain and to understand. And I listened to like multiple hours recently with him, and it was like I still am confused. But it's like he came on. You probably know Lex Friedman, right?
Mhm.
Because of yeah, Joe Rogan. So he went on Lex Friedman, but he's also been on a bunch of other podcasts, basically saying we've evolved to learn not truth, but to survive or whatever. So
Right.
like when he first said this, I kind of thought like he said when you look at if I'm looking at this lamp, it doesn't it's not it doesn't really look like that. We've just kind of evolved to see it in such a way to survive.
Right.
But I thought it kind of stopped there, but I kind of thought that meant like in reality this lamp just looks different, but it's like no, this is all consciousness. And according to him, he thinks that like he has said that he's proved it. So it's like like when you're looking at this lamp, it's not only is it's not material, it's I can't even really explain it. It's in consciousness. And I've heard another reason why I brought it up to you is I've heard some people for whatever reason say that like they think it's a better way to from a psychological standpoint to I guess believe in this. Like I don't really know why. But yeah, it's all really complicated, and it sounds like you pretty much just believe the same thing that I do, as does like Sean Carroll. Do you know Sean Carroll?
I
Yeah,
do.
yeah, yeah. As Sean Carroll. So it's like I think we pretty much like agree that like we're just living in like a material world. Anything that's happening in the brain is material, and it's only happening because of material things. but there are people out there who believe that like it's all just conscious, I guess, and it's very hard to wrap your mind around. But you brought up Robert Sapolsky, and you brought up his belief on. I think what you were getting at was his belief on no free will. So, do you believe that we have no free will? And you also kind of said, since we have no free will, anything that we like, if I desire to go to the gym, I really desire to go to the gym, and then I will. So, is that kind of like your belief that like we pretty much have no free will, and therefore whatever happens is going to happen, and you might as well be have a positive outlook at it. You know what I mean?
Okay, so a lot to unpack there.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm trying
Yeah,
to
yeah,
get through a lot in a short period
yeah.
of
No,
time.
no, it's good, and I think I have a way of succinctly answering that. Going back very quickly, I'm all for good arguments, right? There are a lot of good arguments that I don't believe in or that I don't happen to believe, and it doesn't like I'm not a physicist, like any of those things, right? I've just heard smart people talk about these, and for whatever reason, my intuitions lead me to say, hey, yeah, this one sounds right to me. And I'm always open to good arguments, right? I like things that are based on things. Just show me some evidence, right? Now, when it comes to this idea of free will, I free will, I don't think is the, or I'm going to use some different words here. That I'm not going to use free will. I'm going to use determinism. And when we look at some different like fields of thought or so yeah, some different thoughts on this, they're determinists. That's what I consider myself to be. And then there are people who are compatibilists, which are I think they call them like soft determinists or something like that. And then there are people who are fatalists, where they just think everything's going to end up a certain way no matter what. So I don't believe there's like a predestined like type of outcome. I do believe, though, that what's happening in the moment, I'm making decisions based on prior causes. That, the idea of like uh, something you just said was something like, well, we should just have a positive attitude, anyways, right? Well, what would make someone be a person who would have a positive attitude? That so there's nature, right? Genetics and things of that nature. There's nurture, our upbringing, which we don't choose either of those. And then there's the idea that if someone, depending on their religious beliefs, they may be able to put a soul in there, right? And they also didn't choose that, right? So nature, nurture, and if someone holds that belief of the soul, well, none of those three things are of their making. Those are things that have determined who they are, and by virtue of that have created that chain of events. So, part of that is that if we were to go back in time to any moment in my life, that I couldn't have made another decision in that moment, which has helped me tremendously in a lot of different areas of my life. And that idea that yes, things are determined by prior causes, so the inputs matter, our decisions matter. This podcast wasn't going to happen if you hadn't seen my post, reached out to me. Like, our actions matter. It's that when we make those decisions are being made in the dark. That it's something below the surface based on prior inputs are creating this outcome.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're kind of like a mix. It's like it's a mix between essentially like millions of years of evolution mixed with like nurture, nature, who we are, but we're still making a decision, right?
No.
Oh no, no.
So that would be the idea of a compatibilist. So a compatibilist, or please forgive me, a compatibilist, and I'm going to explain this to the best of my ability. Again, we're talking about my hobbies here, not my area where I
Yeah, yeah.
operate on a full-time basis. So the idea of compatibilism is that because there's not a gun to my head, I can still call it free will because I'm still making the decision, even if everything's determined. So even a compatibilist would say that, yeah, there's no free will. Technically, it's still determined. Like I've heard compatibilists say free will is just the wrong language altogether. And because there's not a gun to their head, it's still of their own choice. They're still the free agent making that choice. It's that, and I've heard someone say this, that's like saying you aren't a puppet as long as you don't mind your strings. So no, I like me getting to the end of this sentence. I have no idea how these words are coming out of my mouth in a grammatical way that are going to end in a period. That's just happening, and it's all happening below the surface. Even if you were to say that any conscious thought that I have in my head is producing this, well, where's that coming from? My memories, my beliefs, my attitudes, all of those things are producing what's happening here. All of that's prior inputs, which are determining what's happening here.
So ultimately, you would say that you agree with Robert Sapolsky that we don't have free will,
Correct.
but we do in the sense we kind of do in the sense that like you are a like basically you will take responsibility for your action, even though ultimately I don't want to say it wasn't your action, but it
Right.
right.
Yeah. Right. So I get what you're saying. And this is it, it, you know, and again, we could literally talk about this for hours, if not days. So
Yeah.
yes, as a human living in society that, yes, if I do something and let's say like you know, I harm someone or I say something inappropriate, like, yeah, I'm still going to apologize, right? It's not, oh, I don't have free will, so I couldn't have done anything differently. Like the society's not there, right? And it's not like if a tornado wrecks someone's house, you don't put the tornado in jail, right? Like because the tornado just does what a tornado does. So like when it comes to responsibility and and this is why I think these conversations are so fascinating. And I've heard people like Robert Sapolsky, and I'm listening to his book now, Determined. And I learned about Robert Sapolsky years ago, and I've heard him on several podcasts and in debates and stuff, and I think he's brilliant. The book Determined so far has been incredible. I don't know, a quarter of the way through it, and he has a really good debate on YouTube between him and Dan Dennett. Dan Dennett, he recently passed, and he's a compatibilist, and it's cool to hear that conversation. Sam Harris had him on his podcast. Great conversation. Sam also being a determinist. That when it comes to stuff like that, well, if they've shown themselves to be someone who acts a certain way, well, then putting someone in jail, for example, isn't necessarily about punishment. It's about keeping them away from people they would do harm to. And there's a difference in that mentality. Um, so I, yeah. So when I do things, yes, I own them. I take responsibility and I use that as input and then I work to operate differently in the future. I do think inputs matter, right? Like, giving parking tickets for someone who, parks in the wrong spot. Well, that's a deterrent. It's not to say they're going to keep doing it because now they have a different input. So it's just determined by prior causes.
Yeah, and I brought it up to link back to psychology and what you do
Mhm.
because when I listened to Robert Sapolsky on a podcast, he was basically saying, and I agree with this overall. I mean, it's once again a very hard thing to wrap your head around, but I agree that, like you said, you don't arrest a tornado for going over a house. Like we arrest people for murder and everything else. And it's like, to a certain extent, there is like practical reasons for that. But at the same
Mhm.
time, you shouldn't necessarily like blame that person because that's just who they are. There's really no reason to like get, I know it's different if it's like they did something really bad to like your child or something, but it's like basically his point was that like you really shouldn't like judge people because that's just who they are and ultimately they have no free will. And I think that ultimately leads. I think that some people look at it as a bad thing. Like if I have no free will, I can't take. It's almost like I can't take accomplishment for what I've done. It's just going to happen. But you can also look at it as like, well, you have no free will, so anything that you've done in the past that's been bad or wrong, you really shouldn't feel guilty about because you're just going to do it anyways. You see what I'm saying? I think that there's goods to looking at that. I just wanted to see what you thought about it, but yeah, so we have to wrap up here soon, unfortunately. But for one, with the idealism, the consciousness stuff, I wasn't able to explain it well. But I would just say go listen to Donald Hoffman, and then you'll get a better idea of what I'm talking about. But I mean, it really does sound crazy to me. It's totally unintuitive, but and he's like, I think he works at like UCI as like he's like a neuroscientist or something. But so back to what you do, and then we'll end it. One last question I had on what you do. How hard is it? Because I mean, I actually majored in psychology, like I told you before, and I thought about going further with it. I didn't. But how hard is
Mhm.
it to get clients and all that kind of stuff? Is it the type of thing where you kind of almost have to be like a salesman when getting clients? You have to like figure out ways to like gather people or get people to come to you, or is it a pretty easy process just to like get your own clients?
So I had 15 years of sales experience. So, talking to people and networking and things like that. I'll share some some of my journey that when I first transitioned into coaching full time or even part time, because I started my practice in 2016. It wasn't until 2020 when I went full time. 2016 to 2020, I was working at other companies. And so I was around people. They knew I was coaching people. So I had some people coming to me that way. Right. So by virtue of who I was around and the jobs I had and friends and things, or not so much friends, I'd say coworkers. So I coached some people in that sense. I coached at a company while also having my own company, and some of those people who I coached at that company became private clients too. So that was one way I got clients. Another way was in 2021, I was running a room on Clubhouse. You may be familiar with it was an audio only app, and it was big that year. It's still around, and it really blew up that year. And I was running a morning room where I was going over personal development topics for free, and people would come, they like what they heard, we'd do a private call, and then they wanted to work with me right as a client. So in that sense, like if someone's out there, just like any other company, you have to market, you have to have the conversations, you have to be able to, share your unique value proposition. So whether it's hard or easy, yeah, I mean, it's running a business, right? A lot of businesses don't make it. So right now, a lot of my efforts are spent on being on podcasts. I love doing this. I love having intelligent conversations about these topics. So I appreciate you having me on and having this conversation. You've touched on a lot of things that I really enjoy talking about. And then I'm also, I do a lot of networking here locally where I live. And part of that was driven by the fact that most of my clients are everywhere else except here. So now I'm working on creating sort of a local footprint where I live. So it's been different ways of getting clients. And yes, I'm always looking for clients. Um, and, you know, and part of this also goes back to my philosophy of which I haven't shared on this show. And my philosophy is that it's to create people or help facilitate the change to where they don't need me. Now, my goal is to create a world big enough through me growing and learning to where people want to be in my world, right? People want to be around me and work with me in different capacities. And there are some people, I heard a great saying, some people are with me for a reason. Some people are with me for a season. Some people are with me for a lifetime. Well, the people who are with me for a reason, once we handle that, well, I need to find someone else. So it's, I have some people that I've worked with for years now. They're in like my group coaching program and stuff like that. They just stick around because they like it. They're always growing and learning, and I'm growing too to keep them in my world. And then other people, we do a breakthrough session and I don't talk to them again because they go out and do all the cool things they want to do without me. So yes, it's constantly like, it is looking for the next client and making sure that my funnel's full in that sense. And to some people that suits them well, other people that doesn't suit them well. And if that didn't suit me well, then I could potentially go be a coach at a company or something like that and just not do my own thing.
Yeah. And do you do all your sessions like over Zoom, or do you ever meet like in person?
So, interestingly, I did have it was one of that, like I mentioned, I'm working to get a local footprint here where I live. And I did have someone find me online who was local. And that was the first, this would have been, I don't know, 2 months ago, maybe. That was my first breakthrough session that I had done in person in since maybe before 2020. So majority, if not all, like with the exception of that one over the last several years, like 4 or 5 years, everything's done via Zoom.
Would you say that it's better in person or
No,
in over Zoom?
I wouldn't say it's better in either one. It's the same process. It's just whether or not we're in the same room. I think that Zoom, there are some conveniences there, and being in person, if it's the right location, it's the same process and the technique works.
Yeah. Yeah, I almost feel like I like Zoom better. I mean, it's obviously just like more convenient to do it from your own home, and it's like I don't really necessarily feel like I need to be like in the same room as the person. I could see how some people would want to, but so lastly, plug your website or whatever it is that you do. You don't have like a podcast or anything, right?
I don't. And thank you for asking that question. I do have a few different places people can find me. My Coach Ray, right? That's my company name, mycoachray.com. That's where people can read about my services, and there are links on there to some other things. And then I have a link tree. It's just my name, Ray Ciafardini. So it's RayCia, F as in Frank, ARD as in David, INI, Junior, JR.com. So raychaffardinijr.com. If you go there, that has other links to like my social media. One place I would advise people to go, and this is both on my link tree that I gave you, raychaffardinijr.com, and my coach Ray. It's called Buy Me a Coffee. And what I do on there is I post articles. Majority of the articles are free, and it's all focused on personal development. If someone wanted to, I do have a membership. It's $10 a month. And that way, I write articles specifically about NLP that they can get for $10 a month. And that's a deep dive into some of the NLP topics. Most of the stuff on my website, I run like free hypnosis sessions. Like depending on when someone watches this, we're in 2024 now. For the rest of the year on Thursdays, I'm doing free hypnosis sessions. So you can see all of this on my website and that link tree. That's everything. If someone needs something from me, that's where they can find that stuff. So thank you for letting me yeah, share that. And I do have some short videos on YouTube. I don't have a podcast, and I did put up a few tips on YouTube.
Okay, sounds good. And then I always ask this last question: is some any movies, podcasts, TV shows, music that you're into? It could be related to
Mhm.
what we talked about in LP, or it could just be anything that you're into. I ask only because I'm always looking for new stuff to like listen to. I listen to a lot of podcasts and
Mhm.
always am interested in new stuff to watch. So anything that you could recommend?
Sure. My two podcasts that I listen to that just on a regular basis, like I have several on my list. We mentioned Sam Harris. I love Making Sense. That's Sam Harris's podcast. And then the other one that I listen to, I'm a fan of religion and learning about religion. And Bart Ehrman, he's a Dr. Bart Ehrman. He's a professor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He has a podcast called Misquoting Jesus, and it's the history of the Bible, which it's a fascinating podcast. I've listened to every episode up to this point. I think they just had their 100th episode. That's a fun one to listen to, and he's a world renowned scholar on the topic. Written a lot. He's taught. He's debated. He's so Making Sense and Misquoting Jesus. Those are two that I love.
Okay, sounds good. Are you religious or are you just interested in learning about like religion?
That's a great question. Because we're wrapping up, I'll say that I love learning about religion, and I think that Bart Ehrman's a great resource for that.
Okay, I actually am very interested in that too. And also, one last question on Sam Harris's podcast is, do you pay for like the subscription for Sam Harris?
I do. And for people who are hearing me say this, the reason why I like people like Sam Harris and Bart Ehrman, excuse me, is that
No
I
problem.
believe they're intellectually honest. I don't always agree with what they say. And one thing I do believe is that they are smart people. So I like listening to smart people because that it sharpens my views that I may hear them talk about things that I don't agree with. And then it forces me to go research them more. Right. So both of those people are people that I don't agree with everything that comes out of their mouth. And I love listening to them because they do form good arguments.
Yeah, I was just because I've considered paying for the Sam Harris one, but
Yeah.
I'm kind of wondering how much longer does the conversation
Oh,
usually go?
okay, so one thing that I do appreciate about Sam as well, because all of his stuff, like he's self-funded, no sponsors or anything like that. This goes for his podcast Making Sense, his meditation app Waking Up, and then he also has a Substack now. And all of those, there are subscription fees. And if someone were to email him for any one of those or all of them and ask for them for free, he'll give them to you.
Yeah, I heard about that. Like if you don't have the money to pay, he'll give them to you. So yeah, maybe I'll take him up on that. I haven't yet, but I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah,
He doesn't care, and that's what I like, and that's what I appreciate about his audience too, because there are some people that pay the full amount, and they know that they're paying, so other people are going to get it for free. And Sam's very transparent about that, and it's a cool model. I think it's I mean, he has said that he believes it's hard to duplicate. He happened to get it right, and yeah, whether it's his podcast, like I said, his Waking Up, his meditation app, which is phenomenal. I've used it every day for the last several years. And then his Substack. there's yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on. I was actually going to say this before, like when the first time we talked, um, I found it easy to talk to you. Like it was, you're a easy guy to talk to. So thanks for coming on. It was a great conversation, and I feel like you'd be a good um, person to go, get coached for. So thanks again. And we could have talked for longer. Like I could have gone over. There was like more questions I had, but I was trying to
Yeah.
get done within the 2 hour period we had. So any more questions I have, I'll probably just ask you offline, and then I'll send you those links when they're up.
Perfect. Well, thank you for the kind words. It was a pleasure talking to you as well, Mike, and maybe we can do it again in the future.
You too. Sounds good. Bye. And
Bye.
that's one other thing real quick is I usually always offer that if you ever want to come back on, let
Yeah.
me know. I would love to have like repeat guests and we can talk more. So, all right. Thanks, guys. All right. Bye.